Right. Well, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Welcome to our first DEI task force meeting. This is so exciting. And I'd like to call the City of Kenmore Diversity, Equity, Inclusion meeting to order for February 17th, 2022. I will now take the roll, and I would like to please ask that our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion DEI task force members please have your cameras on and say you are verbally present as I call your name. Thank you. All right, Darlene Ademba. We'll have her down as excused. Juanita Aguilar.
I'm here.
David Arthur.
Present.
Marco Ballesteros.
Here.
Lily Bishop.
I'm here.
William Bill Castro.
Here.
Peggy Evans. Peggy Evans. Okay, we'll have her as excused. Jeannie Galloway. We'll have her as excused. Carlos Gill.
Yeah, right here.
Juliana Pulley.
Hi.
Nancy Ty.
Present.
Parker Travis.
Here.
And the following have been excused: Aisha Jallo and Leslie McGuire. So we're going to be starting with the agenda item, and I wanted to please let you all know, while there will be opportunity for public comment at future meetings, this meeting will not have a public comment component. And I would actually like to begin with introductions. We have several individuals who'd like to give you all a warm welcome, and we will first begin with our city consultant, Shannon Kelly Ray. Shannon.
Thank you so much. And first, let me extend to you a warm greeting and welcome. Thank you so much for partnering on this very important work. And our saying is, build nothing for them without them. Build nothing for the community without the community. And because of that, we felt that it was extremely important to make sure that we include the community in all of the work that we do. It was important to me. It's important to the city manager, Rob Carlinzi. It's important to Mayor Herbig, and it's important to everyone. And so as the consultant leading the effort for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, I wanted to welcome you. Thank you for your collaboration and partnership. There are so many other things that you could be doing with your evenings, but you're giving your time and your talent and your effort and your energy to this work. And it matters for the people who show up every day to leverage all that the government can offer, but you bring an important voice and perspective for those people that don't show up. And in government, they always say the squeaky wheel gets the oil. There's always some folks that know how to leverage government to get it to do everything, but there's so many people that get often left behind. And so I'm so excited that all of you have stepped forward to share your talents and share your insights and experiences for the betterment of those folks who don't show up, both now and for years to come. So thank you so much.
Shannon, you cut out a little bit, but it's all good. We heard you. Thank you so much. So with that, folks, good evening. I'm Leonora Polania, Human Resources Manager here at the City of Kenmore, and I had the privilege and opportunity and honor to speak with each and every one of you. And I can't tell you enough how excited and delighted and grateful we are that you all applied to be part of our very first DEI task force. And the perspectives, the experiences you bring to the task force will be vital as we develop our policy. And again, thank you all so very much in advance for your contributions and your participation. And in the interest of time, because we have a lot of material to cover in this meeting, I will now pass the mic to our mayor, Honorable Mayor Nigel Herbig.
Hello, everyone. Like Leonardo said, I'm Nigel Herbig, Mayor of Kenmore, and on behalf of the City Council, I want to welcome you into this work, and I want to thank you for your civic commitment. This work is sadly somewhat new for Kenmore. We've made small symbolic steps in the past: a Pride proclamation here, a Black History Month proclamation there, a welcoming city resolution over there. But the events of 2020 really laid bare our need to really examine our systems and our culture and ensure that we're building a city that is truly welcoming and accommodating of all people. The summer of 2020, especially the murder of George Floyd, shook this nation. It shook me personally. It shook our council personally. And the blatant disregard for life that we saw on tape really laid bare and made obvious to so many folks the systemic racism that's baked into our history and frankly, government at all levels. Since then, we have taken some steps. We signed on to the Obama Foundation's Mayor's Pledge and held listening sessions on police use of force. On September 14th, 2020, we passed Resolution 2349, which declared racism a public health crisis. The same day, we also passed a resolution which approved a framework to develop and implement diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and programs. This resolution directed the city manager to come back to the council by November 9th, 2020 with a DEI policy and a program development plan and timeline. Our city manager reported back with a DEI plan and a timeline that included adding a new position for Leonora and appointing a DEI task force. Last year, we also brought on Channing Kelly Ray as our consultant to commence the work. This DEI work will not and cannot be a one-time thing, and the policies and programs that you help develop should apply broadly across the city organizations and the community. I want to be clear here, nothing is sacred or off limits. We don't want you to hold back. We want you to tell us what you think. We know that we will be better and stronger if you do. In her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, Ijeoma Oluo said, we have a real problem of racial inequality and injustice in our society, and we cannot wish it away. We have to tackle this problem with real action, and we will not know what needs to be done if we're not willing to talk about it. Oluo goes on to say that these conversations will always be hard because they will always be about the hurt and pain of real people. And if you're white and you don't want to feel any of the pain by having these conversations, then you are asking people of color to continue to bear the entire burden of racism alone. Speaking for my colleagues on the city council and for the city organization, we're willing to have this conversation with you, no matter what it might expose or how uncomfortable it might be. We don't want you to bear this burden alone. We also want this effort to go beyond words on paper. We want to take action to move the needle on this and advance the cause in a way that makes a direct difference in the lives of our BIPOC neighbors. What you create as a task force can help us do that. We're thrilled that you're all willing to serve on the task force, and we're excited for what's ahead. We want you to really get to know each other, see and hear each other. We as a council are here to support you. So call on us anytime you have any questions or concerns. Again, I really can't thank you enough for volunteering and giving your time and stepping into this difficult and necessary work. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Herbig. And the next individual I'd like to introduce is Rob Carlizzi, our city manager.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I want to just echo everything that's been said so far. I really appreciate the mayor's words, and he does represent the city council and our whole organization on this. If I can, I'd just like to read just a few words from the budget message that we produced when the city budget was adopted about a year and a half ago. It was in the wake of all the things that were going on in summer and fall of 2020. And let me just share a few excerpts from that. First of all, we point out in the budget message that Kenmore is not immune to racial inequity and disparity. And there's some statistics on that, even right here in Kenmore. We know that our Hispanic residents are twice as likely to live below the poverty level as our white residents, and Black residents are 5 times more likely. Educational attainment and other demographic measures for Kenmore tell a similar story. And for King County, income from Black households is 52% of white households, and Hispanic households bring in about 1/3 less than white households. And trends show that the number of children below the poverty line is growing dramatically in King County, with children of color bearing the disproportionate brunt of the trend. About 46% of Black children in King County are below the poverty level, and that's 7 times the rate of white children. Health, education, and other indicators point to the similar demographic trends in King County. But this is more than about statistics and numbers. Qualitatively, we know there is much hurt, anger, frustration, and even despair among too many of our sisters and brothers who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. These feelings are justified and are not new. The social unrest and protests of the last few years once again bring this issue to the forefront and hopefully motivate all of us to move, to act, and to change. Such action and change can take place right here in Kenmore, but any conversations we have and actions we take must not be superficial, just like the mayor said. It's not just about changing our attitudes. It's about dismantling systemic racism throughout the complex and entrenched social, political, and economic systems that bias in favor of white people. But what can little old Kenmore do to make any real progress on this issue? Isn't it a national or even global in scope? And therefore, shouldn't we leave it to larger institutions such as Congress or the US Supreme Court to solve? Actually, there are things that we can do right here at the local level. We can start with examining our own systems and processes. And we want you as a task force to give us recommendations on things like our hiring processes and our purchasing processes and how we do outreach to our residents. And you can give us advice on all sorts of things. Also, real change, on the argument that it's not just being solved at the national level, real change happens one heart at a time, and you can't get any more local than that. And we might be surprised how our actions can actually ripple over into other communities. The more cities, big and small, that take on this issue, the more momentum will build and the more it will roll up to state and national levels. So we actually think it starts right as local as you can get. So Kenmore can make a difference. You as a task force can make a difference. You have our full support, and we're grateful for your willingness to dig deep and make a difference. So thank you so much.
Leonora, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. All right, folks. So next item on our agenda is the task force charter. And I'm sure that you all have read it by now, but I'm just going to give a quick overview regarding some of the items. And wanted to start by letting you know, as a task force, as you know, you will be provided with summaries and DEI information on the approaches by other cities and public organizations and how Kenmore compares and what you will do is assist in the development of Kenmore's approach. And as a task force, you will also be providing feedback and recommendations as you assist with advising on a public engagement process. And as a task force, you will provide feedback on potential data sources and other factors to consider in developing an accurate community profile. And you will review the community profile and provide recommendation. As a task force, you will provide feedback on city services and delivery methods and provide a recommendation on the gap analysis, as well as providing feedback on policies and programs and provide recommendations on that gap analysis. And finally, as a task force, you will review the draft DEI policy and implementation strategy report that you all would have contributed to, and will provide your feedback and recommendations. And so with all the affirmation items, each of them with your contributions may then be presented to City Council no later than May 2022 this year. And at that time, the DEI task force will be retired for the time being. So those are some items that I just wanted to review with you all, and you did have the opportunity to read over the charter that we sent to you via email. So with that being said, Shannon, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think that you captured it all. Just that, you know, getting the advice and counsel of this task force, having them help us make sure that we're not leaving any voices behind, and no members of the community without engagement. That's going to be really, you know, really key. It'll be great to have them looking over our shoulders, helping us look around corners, and just making sure that we are truly a body that is representative of the voice and the will of all of the community.
Thank you, Shannon. And so with that being said, and wanting to make sure everyone's voice is heard, I would like the clerk to please note that we've actually had some of our additional task force members that joined us a little later. I believe is Peggy Evans, Juliana Cooley, and Jeannie Galloway. Are there any other task force members I haven't called yet? No? Okay, right on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been noted.
Okay, right on. Thanks.
I just got a message from Darlene saying she's running a little late. So,
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Okay, next item on our agenda is that we were going to talk about the next meeting and meeting schedules. So I wanted to say to everybody, thank you so much for contributing to the poll. And it looks like we will be having these future meetings on Thursdays. So we will be meeting on Thursdays, and I see hands up and the applause symbol, the ASL applause symbol from David. Oh, and there will Bill too. So Thursday is going to be the day we'll have our future DEI meetings. Thank you. And then from there, Dawn Rayton, our city attorney, will be presenting on open public meetings, aka OPMA Act and the Public Records Act, PRA. And yeah, go ahead, take it away, Dawn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Leonora. As noted, my name is Dawn Rayton. I am the city attorney for the city of Kenmore, and I've been asked to provide tonight's open government training. But first, I just wanted to echo thanks. Thank you for volunteering and being here tonight. You're taking time out of your private time, and we really appreciate it. I am about to go through the PowerPoint that was provided, I believe, or published, and I'm going to ask our city clerk to share it and put it up for everybody to see.
Stand by. Let me know when you see it.
I see it. It is, yeah, perfect. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we are doing what's called open government training. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to briefly note, this is the same training that I would be giving to the city council. I've been asked to keep it to 30 minutes, which is actually quite ambitious. So I'll try to break up the two categories into 15-minute segments. And there will be time for questions at the end. So if you have any, if you could hold them until then, that would be much appreciated. So in 2014, the legislature adopted training requirements for cities, public agencies for the Open Public Meetings Act and the Public Records Act, which are the OPMA and the PRA. They required that public agencies have training within 90 days of taking an oath of office or beginning or assuming duties, and also required a refresher training course every 4 years. This training needs to be consistent with the Attorney General model rules. And in case you want to delve deeper into these two topics, after this training, I provided the Attorney General's link, which does go into these concepts much deeper. And for tonight, however, because this may be new to most of you, I will just be going into the basics of the OPMA and the PRA. Next slide, please. So in 1971, I believe for both acts, the OPMA was created by public initiative, one of those sunshine laws that you may have heard. And I always read the legislative declarations because I think they're so important. So the legislative declaration for the OPMA says, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies that serve them. The people do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for the people to know. So basically, they created the OPMA with the purpose of making all meetings of a governing body public, open to the public. Next slide. So really the question is, what is a meeting? Because that is what needs to be open to the public. The OPMA identifies through definitions, but the first definition, which you would hope would give you the most guidance, definition of meeting, doesn't actually do that. Instead, it says a meeting is a meeting in which action is taken, a little bit circular. And so you have to delve more into the definitions such as action. Well, what is an action? An action is broadly defined by the OPMA to include the official transaction of business for the city. We'll just say city, not public agency, which could include something as official as public testimony, but could be as broad as deliberations, discussions, considerations, reviews, and evaluations, and of course, even a final action such as a vote. And in fact, the next definition is final action, which is a collective decision, of a negative or positive decision. But action, as you note, is much more than just the vote. That's important for more of what we will discuss. Now, you may be sitting here and say, I wasn't elected to office. I'm just donating my time. Why am I getting this training? Well, the OPMA actually defines a governing body not to just be an elected official such as your city council, but it says it includes, and I highlighted it for you, it includes the council or other policy or rulemaking body or any committee thereof. When the committee acts on behalf of the governing body, conducts hearing, and here's the critical part for you, or takes testimony or public comment. And in fact, I believe your charter anticipates this body to take public comment on the important work that you're doing. And because of that, you are a governing body subject to the OPMA. So taking all of those definitions, case law has essentially given us guidance, public agencies, the city, as to what a meeting is. And they identify that a meeting occurs under the OPMA when a quorum of the governing body gathers with the collective intent of transacting the governing body's business. So you need a quorum. I always do this in numbers. Right now you have 14 members. So it is 8 of you. If there's 8 of you conversing, intentionally conversing, then you are acting and you have potentially created a meeting. But there's always questions that I get, such as, well, we're traveling together, or we're going to something, another entity or agency, or even there's a summer concert out there. Can we all go to that? The answer is yes. Social events, traveling, there's guidance that just because you're on this task force doesn't mean you're creating a meeting, but you need to be cautious. So if 8 of you are in a bus going to a summer concert, just keep it social and don't discuss what may be coming forward to your task force or what you may have already looked at. So just keep it on the social level and then you should be fine. Next slide, please. So now that we know what a meeting is, I always like to highlight the difference between a regular and a special meeting. And essentially just know that there's really only 2 types of meetings. One is a regular, which is really set out by rule, meaning it's adopted, the city council has adopted regular meetings by ordinance on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Monday of every month. Every other meeting is a special meeting. So this task force is meeting by special meeting because you haven't adopted anything by rule or it hasn't been adopted for you. So special meetings, regular meetings, they have notice requirements, but for your purpose, we have a wonderful staff. City clerk always provides all the required notice, which would include the agenda. So your business tonight in all special meetings must have an agenda that identifies what the business to be transacted will be. And then the OPMA states that no final disposition on a business matter can take place unless it was on that agenda. For example, the city council couldn't put on a special agenda a new ordinance and then vote on it because that would be taking final action on an ordinance that was not on the agenda, not giving the public notice that it was going to happen. Next slide, please. And then some questions I get about, well, we have a meeting. What kind of conduct? What can occur at that meeting? And one of the things I think it was noted earlier at the outset of this meeting was that there's no public comment. Well, no, tonight, but the OPMA doesn't require public comment. Instead, public comment occurs most frequently because councils want public comment. So they put it in their rules and allow for it. Recordings, when we used to have in-person meetings, a person could record, videotape or audio recording of a meeting, and that is allowed. If there are issues such as a group or a person renders the order infeasible, then the OPMA provides process to remove that group or person. However, it has to be exercised reasonably. And I think it has to be extreme. It has to make it infeasible. So it's rare that that occurs. And it's odd that they have to say that, but the OPMA actually sets out that you can't have a secret ballot because that would be null and void. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk, and we're going to focus tonight a bit more about is email, phone, and what's called a serial meeting. Before I get to that, pre-COVID, there were always questions about, could you have a telephonic meeting? Because almost all regular and special meetings were in person. The AG, Attorney General's office, noted, sure, you can have a telephonic meeting, but what's important about that is that there must be at a minimum a speakerphone so that the public can listen to the meeting occurring and can hear at the same time what is being said. So that was pre-COVID, because clearly we're not in person. Because of COVID, the governor has issued many policies, which has allowed us, of course, for the last 2 years to attend these meetings via Zoom. There's lots of procedures. I wasn't privy to the 2 p.m. Press release today, but until the emergency is declared over, we are required as a public agency to hold online meetings. We could have an in-person component, but we would also be required to continue online options, and we would be required to meet certain safety steps. So that's why we're here tonight as we are. And then email. I noted it a little bit earlier, but a phone and the use of phone between the task force or any governing body and email can quickly become what's called a serial meeting. When you were young, I actually played the game telephone. You know, you'd be next to someone and with a can and a string, and or they'd tell you something and everybody would jokingly say it down the line. Well, that is kind of a serial meeting, especially if you said, Katie told me to say this and Dan told me to say this. Essentially, if you start phoning or emailing one of your task force members at a time, even if you're not in a room with all of them, and it adds up to a quorum, you could be holding what's called a serial meeting, which is transacting the the business of the city, but it needs to be open to the public. So here's a few rules about that. Well, first of all, you're going to get a lot of emails from staff, but that's okay. It'll be from staff to all of you. The passive receipt of information is not a serial meeting. That's been decided by our courts because it doesn't have what's required. There needs to be an intent to hold a meeting, and you receiving information just doesn't rise to that level. But if you then reply to all, and I've highlighted that, first of all, it's very easy to accidentally do that. So I'm asking you to very carefully think about any replies to such emails. But if you start replying to all and then exchanging comments or information, you could very quickly start with, again, that serial meeting. So do not do that. And as I noted, a recent case, I'm down to the recent Seattle case. You may all be familiar or recall that City of Seattle adopted the head tax, which applied to, Amazon, other businesses. As soon as it was adopted, it became very unpopular. And there were many meetings of the council, emails, texts, phone calls about whether or not that head tax should be repealed. And unfortunately, there was a draft press release that was found that said before a public meeting had ever occurred, that had stated, we have a majority willing to repeal it. Well, a citizen challenged the later repeal of the tax, said it was because of illegal meeting serial. And essentially the court, looking at that and all of the meetings, said that it had to go back to trial because there was a concern where any quorum commits to voting a certain way, that would be a violation of the OPMA. So be very cautious about, again, going back and forth with emails, texts, or phone. Next slide, please. So not just email, but also social media. I always like to tell the elected officials also is that you see it's so easy to communicate in today's social media platforms, Twitter, blogs, Facebook, Instagram. But if you had a quorum, let's say there's a Facebook posting, it's about your business. And if there's 8 of you, you know how quickly you can get comments. Well, if you have 8 or more comments, thumbs up, thumbs down, or one-liners, you could actually quickly create a serial meeting. So I just ask that you be cautious and be aware of that and try very much to avoid discussing your work in social media. And the real life example, it did occur. It was on Twitter after a city council meeting. This was local. Not ours, but another city council. They adjourned after a meeting and someone tweeted, city staff and some council are now debriefing and relaxing at Ivers for a late night happy hour. That kind of sounds fun, right? It sounds like, oh, after all our work, it's great. Unfortunately, it suggested with the word debriefing that they were actually holding an illegal meeting. This hit headline news and gain national attention and just shows you again why you need to be cautious about social media. Next slide, please. Executive session. So the rule is that all meetings should be public, but there's always some exceptions to those rules. The exception to the OPMA is that they allow certain topics to be discussed in what's called executive session. Executive session is just that, it's confidential. It's where the legislature identified certain topics that were important enough to be outside of the public purview. I do not see, or I think it's highly unlikely that you as a task force will need to go into executive session, but I really just wanted to make you aware that it's out there and that the OPMA requires, if like the city council were to go into executive session, they need to identify in public the reason for doing it, which is stating the exact state law that allows you to do it, and the time that the executive session will take. Next slide, please. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into these. These are just the more common allowed topics that state law provides for. The one I see the most of is the potential litigation. So what about sanctions for a violation of the OPMA? The legislature has said that any actions taken in a secret meeting, not open to the public, those actions will be null and void, which means, for example, if a contract was approved or an ordinance for some reason was approved in a serial meeting, then those actions could be declared void, real life ramifications. The civil penalty, if someone goes to court and wins, then the person or the governing body member who knowingly, and that's very important, knowingly violates the OPMA would be subject to a $500 fine for that first offense, and then $1,000 for the all later offenses. The person who wins in Superior Court would win attorney fees and potential costs. And for elected officials, there is the potential for recall of office because it would be elevated to the level of malfeasance. Next slide, please. So now, and I'm sorry if I'm running a little late, but we're going to get through the public records. Just so you know, state law as a governing body, you are required to know the OPMA, that's in the statute. Elected officials are required to know the PRA. But since you are part of the task force, I want you to be aware of how public records may implicate your records. So going back to that initiative, it was also the Public Records Act, or the PRA, was also created by public initiative. And I'm going to read those legislative findings because they're so important to me. It gives me chills every single time I read it because it's really the fundamental basis for these laws. First of all, again, the people do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies that serve them. The people do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments that have created them. Essentially, the courts have reiterated that the PRA's primary purpose is for broad disclosure of public records and requires courts to liberally construe for disclosure. So the core idea is very similar to the OPMA, that public records are presumed to be open and that public records can only be withheld narrowly, meaning it has to very well fit within an exception in the law. Next slide, please. So much like a meeting, you have to know what a meeting is to know if the OPMA is applicable. You need to know, well, what is a public record? Is it a public record or is it my private record? Well, the PRA specifically defines a public record to be any writing containing information relating to the conduct of government or performance of any governmental or proprietary function that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by the local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristic. So from that definition, courts have fashioned what's called the three-part test. So they need to show there's a writing, there's conduct of government, and it is prepared, owned, used, or retained. So the first one, writing. I'm not going to go into it except to say it's almost always a writing. I have yet to find something that is not a writing. Digital, hard copy, paper, photographs, it's always going to be a writing. So emails, texts, etc. That's easy. Next slide. Relating to the conduct of government, also easy. Almost everything you're doing for the city is going to be relating to the conduct of government. The Attorney General's model rules have actually said almost all records, in fact, relate to the conduct of government. And then I love the caveat, except when they don't. What they meant by that is that, you know, people are people and you get personal emails all the time. I'm going to be home soon. I'll pick up the dog, etc. Those by themselves are not necessarily public records. However, if there was an instance where an employee was terminated because that's all that person did was write and receive private emails, well, then the Attorney General has said, but those personal emails give evidence of misconduct. So now they're public records. That's an actual case. Next slide, please. So the critical issue for public records in today's case law and just in general is whether or not that writing that related to the conduct of government was prepared, owned, used, or retained, poor, easy way to remember it, by the agency. So the other ones, it's very easy to find out if the city owns it, used it, or retained it. Used actually is pretty broad. Even if a third-party consultant possesses the record, but city staff used the analysis, you know, kind of looked at it and said, oh, we don't want to do it, that's still being used. So that would equate a public record. But what everybody wants to know was, what about the other type of used? When I use private devices, could I be creating a public record with my private device, my private phone, my private laptop? The courts have said over and over, yes, if you use a private device within the scope of employment or as a governing body within the scope of your official capacity, then you could be in fact creating a public record that is subject to disclosure. This is, however, determined on a case-by-case inquiry. Next slide, please. And I will go into that a little bit more. So I just wanted to very briefly, I saw that our officer, public records officer, was online earlier. I just want to give you a brief snapshot of what staff does so that you better understand when you get an email from them, why you're getting an email from them. So first of all, PRA required the city to adopt their own rules to show the public how they can access public records. City has done that under Chapter 1.10 of the Kenmore Municipal Code. And once the city received what's called an identifiable public records request, meaning if someone came in and said, we want all of the records you've ever created, well, has been held, that's not identifiable. It has to be much more narrow so that we can figure out what to get for you. So once they get that records request, staff immediately acknowledges receipt. There's a 5-day requirement to turn around. And then they are required to do what's called an adequate search for responsive records. And then if they find them, they must produce the records. So what is an adequate search? Thankfully, courts have stated that an adequate search is not a perfect search. So if you miss something, that's okay, but the search must be reasonably calculated to uncover all relevant documents. So you have to follow leads. You have to ask people who might in fact have those records to look for them and to produce them. Once the request is made, and this is very important, the city will send out an email. Let's say it's for a planning record. Well, the public records officer will send out an email saying, hey, I received this. Nobody destroy any records that could be responsive because that is a per se violation of the Public Records Act. Instead, please help me Are there any responsive records so that I can produce them? So normally the city can in fact destroy legally certain records based on a schedule that's published by the Secretary of State, because you can't hold all the paper, there's not enough room. So Secretary of State has said, hey, after so many years, you could get rid of that 20-year-old plat. However, if you get a request in the day and ask for that 20-year-old plat, you can no longer destroy it. That's what that means. So you may be getting an email one day that says, hey, I just got this request. Please hold on to it and tell me if you have it. If you need help retrieving it, we will help you. Next slide, please. So the exemptions, I'm definitely not going into this. Just know, much like the OPMA, which had exceptions and allowed you to go into executive session, the broad disclosure of public records is also subject to certain exceptions that the legislature said, oh, well, of course, these should be private, including certain things like financial information, credit card numbers, social security, licenses, public employment applications. I just wanted you to note that privacy, you would think that would be a part of it, but there is no general right to privacy under the Public Records Act. Instead, the city could only withhold a document. It could be a little embarrassing. Courts don't care. Instead, it can only be withheld if it's highly offensive to a reasonable person and not of legitimate concern to the public. Most often, courts, you can't meet both prongs, which requires disclosure of a document. Next slide. I am not going to read that to you. Those are just more exceptions. I do believe you have that in your packet. At the very end, so go back one more. Yeah, at the very end, if an exception actually does apply, then the city is required by law to provide what's called an exemption log. It just says, hey, we had this document and we aren't giving it to you because of this exception, which let's say it was an application for public employment. They state the statute and they withhold the document. We're required by law to do that. We can't do what's called silent withholding, meaning we know we have it. We won't tell them, even though it's exempt. We have to tell them that we're not giving it to them. Next slide, please. So back to social media. So social media is also implicated by the Public Records Act because more and more people are asking for a governing body members' private documents or private postings on their personal computers. For example, we have a case where an individual asked a city, where was it? I'll remember it. Oh, Puyallup, I believe it was Puyallup, asked for a council person's Facebook posting when she was running for election. The city looked at the request and said, well, that's not a public record, so we don't have it. It's not ours to give. The individual sued the city and the Court of Appeals agreed. And the reason they agreed, which was so critical, they said that the test is whether or not the Facebook postings were created within the scope of official capacity of that council person. And so the court looked at all the postings and said, well, the elected official's job, they didn't tell her to post it. There was no evidence that the city prepared it on behalf of the council person. And that Facebook page was not associated with the city, didn't have a link. That's so important, by the way. That you don't have a link such as, go straight to the city council, the city's website, or vice versa. The city shouldn't have a link to that person's private social Facebook posting. And even though some city business was tangentially discussed, the court actually said, but it only was to a minimal extent, wasn't really that helpful. And because of that, the Facebook posting was private, not public, not subject to disclosure. Next slide, please. Penalties. So much more difficult. If the city fails to meet the Public Records Act, then it is subject to attorney's fees. It is subject to penalties, and generally penalties could be anywhere from the tens of thousands of dollars. I'll talk about the factors in a second, but really the highest liability is those attorney fees. There have been $250,000 awards, $500,000 awards, from $0 to $100 per day that the record was not disclosed. So it's quite a high liability, which is one of the reasons that the legislature requires training, open government training. The factors that courts have identified, I showed you. I'm not going to go into them, but there are factors that could reduce penalties, such as training, such as this. Next slide, please. And there's factors that could aggravate it, such as increase it, such as lack of training or disregard or actual dishonesty, which we've read cases actually occurs out there. Next slide, please. So I've tried to give you the world of the two sunshine laws, the OPMA and the PRA, which might affect you, others might not. It's a lot to sink in. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or if you think of them later, shoot me an email, happy to answer those also.
Yes. Hello, hello, hello.
I see. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
I can.
So I guess the general question for me is, to what extent should we be careful about how we use our emails? For example, I have a blog or I have a Facebook page, and then of course, like everybody else, I use a lot of emails. What care should I exercise?
I think that is an excellent question, and I really believe that's the question that most governing body members worry about. So first and foremost, if I could give a recommendation, is that all emails, when you do city work, only use your city email address. Sometimes it's just quick and easy to do your own. It's so much easier to segregate city work and personal email. So to the extent you can do a folder, always have it go in a folder. And if you get a response, often someone might send you an email on your personal email asking, hey, I see that you're doing this on the task force. What I recommend is you respond. You can have just always respond saying, hey, thanks for the email. Please use my city email moving forward. And then it always comes through there. So that's kind of a organizational recommendation. When it comes to social media, blogs, postings, you haven't given your right up to be a person, to speak your mind, to do your thing. But what you want to do is be very clear that you are speaking as yourself, not as the task force. And we ask all council members to do that too. You don't say, I am a member of the task force and we think this. Don't do that. Say, I am Mr. So-and-so and I believe this. Absolutely good. It's that same segregate your public work with your private person.
So are we going to get government email addresses?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that'll make it easier to segregate, I guess.
Yes, so we want to
Oh.
make sure that you're taken care of, and so we'll
Okay.
be
All right.
we'll be getting
That-
those for you.
That makes sense.
And again, if things come up, just feel free to shoot me an email.
I will.
And I thought I saw a hand up. Miss Pooley? Oh. Great. Well, if there's no other questions, again, I want to thank you for your time. That was a lot. I think I went over, and I really appreciate your attention tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Don. Thanks. All right, next on the agenda is a presentation of project in discussion presented by consultant and facilitator Shannon Kelly Ray. Shannon.
Thank you. So what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a very brief overview from the 30,000 foot of what it is that we're doing exactly. And so the city is engaging in an organizational equity needs assessment. That means that we're trying to figure out exactly what it is that we're trying to solve for. And the deliverable is going to be a citywide equity policy for consideration and adoption by the board, the city council. And so how do you get to that? What does the assessment look like? So one of the actions that we do is to do one-on-one interviews with all of the executives with city government. That means council members and members of the executive leadership team. And the one-on-one interviews are conducted because when leaders within any organization seek to make decisions on the future course and direction, they have to make those decisions based on where they think the organization is today. So if you're making budget decisions, you think about, well, what is the budget and what is the anticipated revenue and what do we need? So those are considerations. When they want to think about policies, processes, and procedures or programming, they look at where the city is today before they start making plans for tomorrow. So they kind of scan what the resources are and what the community need is based on what they believe the need is, and then they make actions based on that. So I do one-on-one interviews that are really anonymous interviews that would allow for those leaders to be very honest and candid, to give me their insights in what informs their decision-making. And so there is a summary report that is produced of that talks about where leaders believe the city is and where they're going and what's missing and what the strengths, weaknesses, and threats are in terms of progress and development. Another thing that we do, or another action, is to do a survey of staff. Another action is to do a survey of the community. An additional action is focus groups of staff so that we can get into the nuance of findings of those survey results, but we also do focus groups of the community. And so we want to make sure that we do a deep reach into the community and get a broad representation of all of those members of the community across the language, to include American Sign Language if necessary, but to be able to bring all of those disparate voices to the table to find out where they believe things are. Because when leaders make decisions, they have the best of intentions to have we heard Mayor Herbig say that, and City Manager Carl Lindsay say, this is a city that was shaken at its core, and we know that there's room to do better, and we're working hard to do better. And so it's their intention that the city of Kenmore is welcoming, is trusting, is inclusive, that we build a culture of belonging, and they make decisions to build that. But what you find often is that when you ask staff and when you ask the community, and I say ask staff because remember, for the city of Kenmore, the community is people who either live in Kenmore or work in Kenmore, whether it's for the city government or work for other businesses in Kenmore, or the people that visit the city and have a relationship in any capacity. That's community. And so we want to make sure that when we ask folks that are on staff or in the community, do you experience what was designed for you? Sometimes the intent of what was designed is not the impact or what's felt. And so that gap that rests between what's intended and what is lived and experienced is the equity gap. And so we want to be able to identify that equity gap and be deliberate and intentional to think of ways that we might close the gap. And for this Kenmore, it is, how do we develop a policy that will hold us accountable and by design and with some deliberate intentionality, make sure that we're always assessing, building, designing, and thinking of that policy so that we can continue to make sure that we're closing that gap and meeting all of the community where they are, that everyone can move forward together. And so it's both qualitative and quantitative data. And it's data presented in a way that we want to be able to even do a disaggregate of data. So when we survey community members, we want to know, well, we want to have them identify what neighborhood does that person live in? And what is their income level? And what is their gender identity? What's their sexual orientation? Do they have a disability? What language do they speak at home? Do they have an education, a formal education? Are they differently abled in terms of neurodiversity, sensory diversity, physical difference? And so we want to know those things, because you know what happens? If I ask everyone in the community, do you experience trust, value, and respect? Do you feel like you belong? If we look at all of those numbers together, then it'll look like, oh no, things are great. That there's nothing to see here, nothing that we have to fix and work on. But then as soon as you start asking different pockets within the home, and when you look at the disparities that exist between some communities and how some folks feel in terms of feeling welcome, that they belong, sometimes you get a very different picture, particularly for people of color, or for people who are immigrants, or people who are low income, or people who are housing insecure. Sometimes you get very different pictures. And so it's important to dig into that data, so that when we look at those numbers, because some population may be very small, we don't want to discount what may be 1 or 2 or 3% of the population when they are very disparately impacted by our decision-making policies or programs. Sometimes we have to shift what's happening across the many in order to lift up the few. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that. And so that is the process. And so how you'll be engaged is to come along with us along the way. So some of that work we jumped into, but what we want to do is be able to, at future meetings, give you as part of your pre-work and packet that information and those findings. And then we want to get into these conversations, and we want to get your insight and perspective. We want to know your opinion. We want to know, is there another rabbit hole that you think we should be climbing down into? I want you to be tough on us and ask, who did you talk to? Do you have demographic data? Did you, in this information, what conclusions did you make, and what informs it, and what did you find? And is there anything special we should know? And when you feel like there's something missing, hold our feet to the fire and say, make sure that you're going out and you bring this group in or that group in, and the city of Kenmore has a growing population over in this area. Make sure you don't leave those folks behind. Like, for example, sometimes people will do a survey, and in the era of COVID, they'll say, well, let's just do an online survey. Well, the challenge sometimes with doing an online survey is people don't have access to an online methods to participate. And sometimes if they have a cell phone, sometimes you have people who only have so much data or so many minutes. And if they have a family, they don't want to share those minutes with you, or if they only have a landline, you're not reaching them. And so there's so many things that can happen. But also, if you live in a shelter or transitional housing or domestic violence safe place, sometimes you're left out of that conversation. And so sometimes you have to be creative to make sure that you reach out. Sometimes you have to go to those social service providers, safety net providers, and look for tablets, computer banks, or sometimes you have to get those things anonymously and have people fill things out. And you have to transcribe something that's, snail mail, paper, pencil. You have to do whatever you can to get those insights. Or sometimes it's designing a focus group to go to those places to hear those lived experiences, perspectives, and insights. So we want to hear from you. If there's a stone that's not been turned, we want you to tell us, this is what you're missing. But no, we've got Teflon coatings. We want you to be tough, good, bad, or indifferent. Let us know what we're doing, because we want to be able to do this in partnership and collaboration with you. Leonora is staffing. I'm the subject matter expert, but you all are the voices representing the community. You are their skin in the game. You are their voice at the table for now. But I want you to help us, even in how we do outreach and engagement, and to design a process for focus groups to make sure that we're doing all that we can to bring those voices to the table. So that's high level what the process is. I want to stop now and ask if you have any questions about that at all.
No, the question's pretty daunting.
Oh, go ahead. Any questions or any feedback, any insight, any impressions?
Hi, Shannon, this is Lily.
Hi.
I have a question. Has the city and you done any research so far to identify some directions, or are we going to build this from the ground up?
Oh, no, you won't be building it from the ground up. So there is a process that is already representative of best practice in terms of design. And so we'll be following best practice based on design. We can benchmark this work across other different cities on the east side. So other cities that I've worked with include Kirkland, Redmond, Bothell, and Issaquah. And we align that with King County's equity and social justice best practice. And so this is a tried and true design that happens nationally, both in the public sector and private sector. But what we want to do is make sure that as we apply it, Kenmore is a unique place. And we want to make sure that if we have to tweak the design, extend it, blow certain parts of it out and do a little bit deeper of a reach. One of the other things that we do is we do a SWOT analysis based on equity best practices to look at the governing documents of the city. Employee life cycle, the hierarchical structure in terms of leadership, city planning, city programs and processes, and then to look at what those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, and then offer recommendations even in that regard. So all of those things paint a picture. Some of the homework that we've begun to do already also is a community scan to look at who makes up the city of Kenmore. What does early childhood and kindergarten readiness look like? What does insurance, who's covered by insurances and who isn't? And what ages are they covered? And what are the industries of the people that are living and working in the city? So lots of different things, demographics, language, diversity, different levels of diversity. So that's some of the stuff that we look at in terms of research on the front end.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Hi, yes, Nancy, thank you so much. I'm just already so excited and filled with energy. And I think you might have answered my question. It was, I thought I heard mention of maybe a packet of information we'll be getting on whether we'd already done that demographic analysis. And it sounds like maybe not yet, but it's up and coming.
That analysis has been done. So that will be part of one of your early packets. So you're going to be getting that and other information so that you'll get pre-work. So you'll be able to take a look at that stuff on your own time, ahead of time, so that when we get together for our conversations, we want to make sure that we're leveraging the best use of your time as a resource. So then we can be able to jump in and have conversations about process and findings and get your perspective and insight.
Thank you.
So yeah, in the same way that there is a packet prepared for council ahead of their meetings, there would be a small packet prepared for you as well. And then for the purposes of those folks that are attending, that are watching, those things are public record. Those packets are shared on the website that will carry your names, and Anastasia and others with the city always make sure that those things in the agenda are available. So the community will be able to take a look at those things as well. Carlos?
Yes, I just want to say that I read the charter and it's pretty ambitious and pretty well thought out. I don't know who put it together. I underline the word ambitious. And all of the comments that you've been making about demographic information, all of that also sounds very ambitious. I don't know to what extent a city agency like Kenmore can really put all that stuff together to be able to get a good sense of this objective, getting a citywide equity policy going.
Anytime you engage with DEIB work, social justice work, equity work, any of this work across any human population, people have always said that it was ambitious. And sometimes people felt like it couldn't be done. People thought that women would never vote. Folks thought that people that were held as chattel slaves would never be free. People thought that the Latinx community would never be able to fight on their own against against landowners to have farm worker rights. People thought that Asian people would never have standing to be able to naturalize. People thought that kids with special needs would never be integrated successfully into public schools, but it didn't mean that we didn't endeavor to try. And so we've done that work all together as communities, and we've moved closer to the more perfect union. And so I have every faith that with you and with the partnership and collaboration of council and the directors and the community, I think that we may not do it perfectly, but we'll move the needle forward, and every successive generation will work harder to build on what we create with this inaugural group to get us closer to what I hope is the more perfect Kenmore.
I agree basically with what you're saying.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Shannon, that was really powerful what you just said. Thank you for your thoughts and examples. It made me curious about your background, and if it's not a place right now, I can definitely wait. But I'm just wondering, about your journey to what you do today.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, and I don't want to be long-winded because I also want to hear a little bit more from you all, because I want the community in this space, because some of you did the bio and we got 1 or 2 or 3 lines or 5, and I want the community to know you. But in terms of my journey, I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My parents were born and raised in the segregated South in the Jim Crow Mississippi of 1940 and 1944. My mother's father was born in Kosciuszko, Mississippi in 1900. So it wasn't the best place to be people of African descent in this country. But I'm the daughter of people who were enslaved. And I started my career as a middle school and high school teacher working with kids who were in the inner city of Milwaukee that the Office of Management and Budget called hyper segregated. So you tell me what zip code you lived in, I could tell what color pigment your skin was, and even your ethnic background in Milwaukee. And so I wanted to do something more, even outside of the classroom, to better position kids to fully realize everything possible in their lives. Because in a very hyper segregated place where there was not investment by the local government or businesses to create opportunity for young kids of color, especially from the Latinx and African-American community, or poor white kids or rural kids, I wanted to do something more to help them advocate for themselves along with their families. And I say families and not parents, because it's all of their families, it's the village, right? And then I moved to Washington State and worked on the south end of Seattle to help improve the image and reputation of South End schools at Partners for Successful Schools. And then I did community organizing, even when some people don't respect community organizing and don't think it's a real job, but it is. And it's a hard job and it's noble work. And then I got the attention of Michael Reichert, who was the president of Catholic Community Services of Western Washington, and was invited to be their inaugural corporate diversity manager. And when he asked me and offered that role to me, I said, sure, what is a diversity manager? Just all the community organizing you do and all that work you do, you're going to do it across all of the state of Washington. And then Michael Perino was the president and executive at National CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocate Association. And he said, here's an Amex card, go and do that same work across the country now. And I was able to work in Indian country, and I was able to work in the Southeast and help advocate for kids in the LGBTQIA+ community and kids who would age out of foster care or they were drugged in foster care. But I was trying to help kids and families fully realize everything possible for their lives. And then I left and came off of the road and served as Washington State's Chief Diversity Officer, and did the good work across the state of Washington, and did lots of program building and development and structural design. And then I was the Chief Diversity Officer entitled at Providence St. Joseph Health. I've worked in tech, and I've done this work. I wrote the race and equity policy for Kent schools and incorporated best practices into school improvement plans of 44 schools. And I've done this work, and so I don't know that there's many industries, construction, one of my clients is built a Climate Pledge Arena. So I've done a lot of this work, but at the end of the day, when people ask, who are you and what is it that you do? I am one person that is just a teacher and a coach that ended up doing this work to implement best practices into organizations and to help organizations be better versions of themselves so that kids and families across every community can fully realize everything that's possible for their lives. And so that's me, and that's who I am and what I do. So I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I still teach in different ways and coach in different ways. I'm not on a tennis court anymore. So sometimes people will Google me and say, oh my gosh, you were even a tennis coach. So I have a couple of state championships under my belt, but four consecutively to be exact. But that's who I am because I'm an overachiever. And to your point, Mr. Gil Carlos, even when things are hard, you know, I push harder. When people tell me you can't climb the mountain, then I crawl up and I scale it and I'll go around and I'll take a path that is maybe not as well worn, but I'm going to get over the mountain. So I know that we'll have success because I just don't take no for an answer. And like Apollo 11, failure is just not an option. So now, if you all don't mind, we'll have you open up your mics and I want to start going through the list of names here. And if you don't mind, I want to know, so tell us again who you are and why are you, when you could be doing so many other things, why do you find yourself championing and helping us lean into diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for the city of Kenmore? Tell me a little bit about your journey. We don't have a lot of time, but if you could take a minute or so, who are you and what brings you to this table? So let's start at the top of the list. So Carlos, who are you, Carlos, and what brings you to this space?
Well, I'm the son of Mexican immigrants who came from Mexico 100 years ago. And so I don't like to emphasize my disadvantages. I've had many over my life. We were farm workers, had a very tough upbringing, but I just don't go into those kinds of details. I've been construction work, I've done all kinds of jobs, but I became a university professor in the end. And so I'm an author, I'm a researcher. Retired, I've been retired for 15 years. I'm 84 years old. And so one of the reasons that I don't get overly enthusiastic about these measures is because I've been seeing them and witnessing them for more than many of you have been alive. And this stuff of labels, I've gone through many labels, and they've come and gone. And I know the reason that I say that all of this is very ambitious is because I know what has been done, because I helped do it 30, 40 years ago in Los Angeles. But we're not there yet. And so many of these things will still be around after our task force is gone. But I agree with what you're saying. We have to do what we can with what we have. And so in that sense, one of the reasons that I'm taking part in this committee, because I'm a Hispanic, that's a label that is used nowadays. Mm-hmm. I know what that is. I've taught it for 30 years. So I know the ins and outs of what it is to be a minority in this country. And so I think I can contribute a little bit to that.
Thank you for that. Juliana?
Hi, I'm Juliana Pooley. I was raised, I grew up right here in Kenmore Elementary, used to be Kenmore Junior High, Inglemoor High School grad. I'm gonna admit right off the bat that my house I grew up in was a pretty standard white suburban father, mother, 2 kids, you know, kind of sitcom life. But I really loved that actually all of my Kenmore Elementary best friends happened to be children of immigrants. And growing up with them really transformed my life in a way that I didn't realize was even happening until when I moved out of state for college, was out of Washington for about 10 years for undergrad and grad school and launching my career. And I realized how many luxuries and privileges I had, and also how many people had grown up in pockets where they did not have a lot of racial and ethnic and religious diversity. And my career has been in the social services. Most of it has focused on homeless services, directly working. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients in the Bay Area, both as a case manager, as someone who campaigned with the city to open an overnight shelter, and then later for the Contra Costa County, doing some collaborative efforts between nonprofit agencies. And that was also the focus of my graduate work in community and economic development, was on the trauma of homelessness, individual and the intersection of individual trauma, community trauma, and all of that. And that has been a lens that I've really carried with me for several years, because when you dive into homelessness, you are also, that is adjacent to a very broken foster system, human trafficking, incarceration. It overlays with disability and racial issues as well. And then I'm really lucky that when it was time to settle down after having kids and move out of a very, very small, expensive Bay Area apartment with 2 babies, and we were talking about where we wanted to move, I just kept thinking, like, I really loved Kenmore. Like, I really loved that I had friends who lived in the North Shore Summit and lived in that exact same mobile home park, you know, close to Kenmore Elementary. And I didn't realize how much even the housing diversity here in Kenmore shaped my life. And really lucky, right before the pandemic, was able to land in a place that I could never afford now. And I've recently, now I work with refugee women. And so today I spent 4 hours sitting on the floor with some refugees. They're not in Kenmore, but they're just outside in another suburb, and hearing the stories of refugee women who have firsthand experiences with the Taliban, and they're trying to get their kids enrolled in school, and everything you're saying about Google Translate and those tech barriers, and we can't be assuming literacy. Again, this is so real in, you know, so many people's lives. So that is my heart, the social services and working directly with those vulnerable community members, specifically women, is my passion. And I'm also passionate because I have 2 little girls and they're going to be entering school here. And I want their friends, and some of, you know, their friends, they have refugee friends and they have children with immigrant friends. And I want all of that to be safe and beautiful. And I care about the upcoming generation that is going to be raised in Kenmore too. So that's me. That's why I'm here. I'm
Thank you. so
honored
much.
to learn from all of you as well.
Thank you so much. Juanita?
Yeah, I grew up in this area and moved to, actually, I grew up the street down, and from where I live now, my parents come and they walk to my house every now and then. And I grew up here and I loved Kenmore, and my growing up as a minority in this area, it was, you know, sometimes pretty difficult because of how you were referenced, how I was, you know, the ways of kind of eating with tortillas instead of forks was considered weird. And so it was important to me to do this project, not only because of that, because I feel like it's important to have representatives from the population make solutions. One of my first degree was in community psychology, which is a lot of what your work is. It's going into a community, finding if there is a problem not and designing for the community, not for yourself, but actually for that population, because there's always assumptions being made if whoever's designing it doesn't get the input of who it's for. And I've seen that in so many different scenarios. And so for me, it's really important to go and get information from the population that the program is actually for. And also, I love the way you talk, because it's totally, to me, psychology is very, it's evidence-based, but it's also very, it's positive. It's a strengths-based field of study. And that's so uplifting. It's using the strengths of the community to do work, to help others. And I love that. And I think this work is very important. And I think because of my education and the thought process of psychology is meant to be shared, not kept. And so it was sort of pulling me to do this anyway, because I believe strongly in that. So that was why I had to do it, is because there was nothing it was pulling me. I had to do it, not only to help out, but also to be a good role model for the people in my life, for the young people in my life. I think it's important to give back when you have those resources to do so, because not everybody does. And so you have to put in when you can to raise others up. You have to do that. And I was fortunate to be able to do that. And I'm so grateful that I have the life that I have to be able to do that, and to help empower those in our community. So I'm looking forward to proceeding in this journey with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Darlene?
Hello, my name is Darlene Adamba, and I live in Kenmore. So I was born and raised in Kenya, which is in Africa, and I was one of the majority, I would say, for the longest time in my life, until I moved to the US and I became a minority. So I feel like I can kind of understand how, the people who are not in the minority part of the world or part of their life can be misunderstanding to the others, or not really understand what people are going through. And I'm always willing to be that, person to give perspective and help everybody else understand what we go through, or how we see things. So, and that's why I joined the task force, because I think I could be that medium for people. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
Good. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you.
David.
Is it my turn?
Yep.
Hi, I'm David. I grew up in Canada. I'm the son of immigrants myself. My father's from a very small country in the Caribbean called St. Vincent. He left there in 1950. At that time, the population of the country was around 50,000. So he left there, worked in the oil industry for a few years to finance his university, and then moved to Canada, where he met his wife, my mother, at university, and they stayed in Vancouver. I grew up in Vancouver when, it was diverse, but not as diverse as it is now. But I had friends across all socioeconomic boundaries, and best friend growing up was biracial, Chinese and white. Myself, I am biracial, Black and white. I moved to the United States in 1993 to go to chiropractic school in Portland. And then after graduation, we moved back to Washington in the Seattle area. My first job working here was in the Rainier Valley. I worked for one of the only African-American chiropractors for 2 years. It was a very eye-opening experience for me. I had never been in an area where the segregation was so prevalent. working there was seeing people of the lower end of the economic scale was very different for me, but it was great in the sense that I was in a largely African-American community at that point and made me very comfortable. And I also learned about African-American culture, which is much different from Afro-Caribbean culture. So now I'm here. I live in Kenmore. I've lived here for the last 21 years. I'm raising 2 children. One of my children is a transgender female. So that's another thing that I want to do, is to make Kenmore more welcoming for transgender and for other disadvantaged groups. You know, I've been a member of the Kenmore Facebook group, and I see from time to time there's a lot of vitriol directed towards minorities on the group. So I think Kenmore can become a more welcoming community, and I want to be a part of that.
Good.
So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much. Lily.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm from Brazil. I came to the US on my own when I was 20 years old. I actually decided I was going to do so when I was 12. My mom didn't believe me at the time. And thinking about the journey we are embarking right now, it takes me back to what I brought with me. And I think besides that one suitcase and maybe a few pictures, I think one of the most valuable things I brought was my education. I'm very well aware that a lot of people back in Brazil and here don't have access to the level of education I was able to have. And that has allowed me to become a commercial banker for one of the big banks here in our area. And I do a lot of work through my employer to represent the Hispanic community and other minority groups. And I noticed that the more I progressed in my career, the more lonely it became for me, and the fewer faces I see that represent other groups in our society. So while I do this work with my employer to elevate minorities as much as I can, I'm looking for the opportunity to do that for our community and bring more people, you know, to be heard, to have opportunities. Yeah, so this is me.
Good, thank you. Welcome. Marco. Marco.
Hi, I'm Marco. I was born in Mexico. I was raised in Eastern Washington. Moved over to the Seattle area for school. I've lived in Kenmore for about 5 years now. Really like it. Kind of intend to live here for the foreseeable future. I guess I don't have much to say except that I just joined this task force to learn and to see if I could contribute in some way.
Good, thank you so much. Jeannie? Or Jean?
Yes, no, you got it right, Jeannie. Very good. It is spelled in a way that can be confusing. Thanks, Mom. My work is at Bastyr University. I'm working there as a vice president, and I'm a graduate of Bastyr University as well. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and my wife and I and our tuxedo cat live here in Kenmore. We're very proud to call this home. Bastyr is engaged in a lot of introspection, as I think many institutions around the world are engaging in looking at who they want to be in the world and how do we show up and how do we not just stay so focused internally. So Bastyr is really interested in engaging with the community that we are in. And we've just hired, we can't make the announcement yet, but we've just hired an associate vice president of DEI, who I'll be working very closely with in my work. We really have a need, I think, in organizations to not just do DEI, but to be DEI. You know, if it's not an intrinsic part of if it's not interwoven in everything that Bastyr and groups like that are doing, then it's just playing some sort of lip service, which I'm certainly not interested in. So we're going deep and trying to really be very introspective on this. I've had, many personal times of where I haven't been maybe treated very well or have felt less than, as certainly as a woman in some settings and as a lesbian in some settings. And I also realize, kind of the intersection of all things, I also have many places of privilege. And, I come from a family that didn't have a lot. And, I was a first generation student going to college, but I had so many opportunities that came my way because I'm white. And I'm educated, so it's an interesting thing when you think about the individual person and what they experience and how to bring our community forward in a way that people feel like they're included and that they are, and inclusion has so much to do with engagement. Are people actually engaging with us, right, as a city? So I'm interested in that. I've been reading a lot, continuing to learn. I just took a certification program at Cornell University, dealing with DEI and the organization, how DEI can be fit in and worked into the fabric of an organization. So really exciting program. I'm very thrilled to be part of this, representing Bastyr to some extent, but mostly being a citizen of Kenmore and wanting to do whatever I can to be part of a solution.
Thank you so much. Bill?
Let me turn my my microphone on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, good evening. I'm honored and humbled by all the presentations of the panel members. I'm fascinated by all the backstories. My story is I grew up in Puerto Rico and I left when I was 24 to do some training in New York. And then I joined the military. I was in the military since I lived in Puerto Rico, but I became active duty. Then I got out of active duty and lived in Phoenix for like the next 30 years. I've always been involved in healthcare. And my North Star, as given to me by my parents, was to live a life that's well lived because it's in the service of others. And we moved to Kenmore as I guess we're climate refugees, and we're looking for a more inclusive and comfortable state to live in than Arizona for us politically. When we got here, the pandemic was raging, and my wife and I went back to caring for people. We now work at the Seattle School District testing. My wife's a nurse for the school, and I test the kids for COVID. And that's how we spend our time. We still have our youngest daughter. I have 5 daughters. Our youngest still lives with us, and she's going to school locally here at Inglemoor. And we love this community, and we want to do everything to make it prosper. Again, I'm honored, and I heard something when I was older that really moved me. It was Martin Luther King's speech in '68 in March at the National Cathedral. And something he said has really impacted me. It's that the arc of justice is slow, but it bends towards justice. And you reminded me of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Nancy?
Hey y'all, I'm Nancy. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am just, I think, very similar to Bill, just in awe of getting to share this digital space with such incredible people on this task force. I also grew up in the South in North Carolina. Sometimes I think my Southern twang will come out, but also the proud daughter of immigrants who fled Vietnam because of the Vietnam War. And so I'm getting to bring that lived experience. I also come from a public health background. And so to me, it just DEI means helping everyone in our community live their best lives and be able to show up fully as we break down institutionalized racism. At my day job, I get to work as a community engagement and communications consultant with a local firm, and just really excited because one of our current projects getting to work with another organization on also just how to leverage government and the power and influence of government to truly serve people and make our communities more inclusive, and to bring that lens into community engagement and public involvement. And I moved a little over a year ago to Kenmore with my partner and our rescue pup, and we also have a tuxedo kitty as well. So fun to see some of these intersections here. But yeah, just very excited. This kind of work just really fills my cup and fills me with energy, and very excited to learn from such an incredible group of people here as well.
Thank you. Peggy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Peggy Chin-Evans. I am a social psychologist by training, where I studied stereotyping and discrimination. This came about because I actually am a first-generation Chinese immigrant who grew up in Hawaii, and I went to school in Michigan, East Lansing, Michigan. And there I discovered something shocking to myself, which is that I am a minority. Hawaii is about 50 to 60% Asian. That doesn't include all the people who are mixed race. And so when I moved somewhere that actually had a lot of racial history, it was very surprising to me, actually. So it was a racial reckoning for myself. I'm English as a second language. I grew up in an impoverished home, and I think that also impacted who I am as an adult. Currently, I am the Chief Operating Officer for a community health center that serves the largest population of Asian American Pacific Islanders, called ICHS. And one of the reasons why I joined this group is because diversity, equity, inclusion is part of my everyday life. It's what I live, it's what I breathe. And I really see that there is an opportunity in Kenmore. And given that I have lived here for almost 20 years, this is where I make my home with my husband and with my two kids, one of whom also identifies as non-binary. I think that there is so much opportunity for us to make Kenmore more inclusive for everyone, and for everyone to love this place as much as I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think we got everybody. Are we missing anybody? Did we get everybody? All right. Well, thank you so much. And before we go, I'm going to pivot back to City Manager Carl Lindsay and see if there's anything additional he wanted to add for the good of the order. And then Leonora will have you close us out.
Well, thanks again, everybody. And I just really enjoyed listening to the introductions just now. What a great, strong group of people. And I'm really even more thrilled that we've done this, and I have just total faith in. Like the mayor said, don't hold back. Let's have these difficult conversations. Tell us what's on your mind. We're here to help make change happen, and we want to do this with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Leonora?
I just want to add, thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your stories, for being part of this, our first Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force. This is so exciting. I'm thrilled to be working with you side by side in a city that I love and where I live. And I'm also a graduate of Inglemoor. So thank you all so very much. And I'm looking forward to working with you all and getting you your emails. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.